Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin met today in Beijing ahead of the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Xi sided with Putin in his showdown with the West over NATO expansion. It was the Chinese president's first in-person meeting with a world leader in nearly 2 years, and for many observers, it was a sign of the deepening partnership between the authoritarian leaders during a time when more than 100,000 Russian troops amass on the Ukrainian border. We're going to dig deeper into this emerging partnership. Guy Saint-Jacques is a former Canadian ambassador to China. He's in Montreal. Guy Saint-Jacques, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for the invitation.
Let's start with the significance of this meeting. From your perspective, how pivotal was this meeting between Xi and Putin?
Well, I think it was important because it's the first foreign leader that Xi Jinping agrees to meet in Beijing. In fact, he has been so preoccupied with domestic politics that he has not traveled since the start of the pandemic. We saw that at the most recent G20 meeting, he didn't show up. He didn't show up also for the COP26. And in this case, what is interesting is that he is trying to beef up his relationship with Russia. And in a way, if you compare to what Nixon had tried to do in the early 70s when he started to establish relations with China, it was to separate China from the USSR. Now it's like if it's Xi Jinping that is trying to make sure that Russia will be fully separated from the United States.
Right. So this is a very strategic choice that President Xi would make Vladimir Putin his first in-person meeting, really, since the start of the pandemic.
Yeah, but also, of course, it's useful for him domestically to show that he is meeting with an important leader because, of course, there is this boycott and there's nobody from the U.S., Canada, Australia, Great Britain. But also, he wants clearly to show the United States that China can do business with other partners. In fact, they have more in common now with Russia than they have with the U.S.
How would you characterize that relationship at this moment? I mean, are Russia and China allies? Are they partners? I mean, how would you describe the current diplomatic nature there?
Well, I think it's a complicated relationship, and maybe it's more a case of the enemies of my enemies are more friendly to me than the friends of my friends, because they have had a checkered relationship in the last 50 years. There was a brief military fight at the border. That then later they were able to settle their border dispute. And China now, in fact, has become dependent of Russia to get enough oil and natural gas. In fact, Vladimir Putin said that he would be discussing new contracts. And so it's in many ways, it's a marriage of convenience because they need each other. And the other thing that is interesting in all of this is that China will be watching very closely what will happen if Russia goes ahead and decide to invade Ukraine, because they will see this as a test of the resolve of the Americans to intervene and to impose tough sanctions on Russia. And it will be a lesson for themselves to gauge whether they can go ahead with more forceful measures to recover Taiwan.
Right. You have these two essentially border allied states with Western countries under enormous threat from both of them. And it makes a ton of sense that China and Russia would come together because the people who oppose them in all of these things are essentially the same countries, NATO and the Western allies. And I wonder, sir, on this, the U.S. Deputy Secretary General Wendy Sherman, she said that the U.S. sees every indication Russia plans to invade Ukraine, but is factoring in President Xi and the timing of the Beijing Olympics when it comes to exactly when they will do that. Do you think that could be the case here?
I think so. In fact, there were, I saw a report in the South China Morning Post late last week saying that China has pleaded with Russia to delay the invasion, and I think it's probably the case. If I assume that the two, Putin and Xi, have discussed what kind of support China would provide to Russia if the U.S. were to impose very strict sanctions. But in all of this, there are also some risks for China, because the U.S. has been very clear that if Chinese companies help out Russian companies, in fact, they could be subject to sanctions from the U.S. government. And let's recall that this is a very delicate year for Xi Jinping. The Chinese economy is not doing too well. They have worries about whether Omicron will spread, which would have a huge impact on global supply chains. And if this were to be the case, if the economy were to slow down further, it could compromise the chances of Xi of getting a third mandate as General Secretary of the Communist Party when the 20th Congress of the party meets at the end of the year. So that's why, in a way, China will probably tell Russia, maybe, you have to think this very carefully. But if they decide to proceed, I think that clearly China will stand on the side of Russia.
Okay. Guy Saint-Jacques, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran.